I want to quickly introduce Hans, who's going to be giving our talk tonight. Hans is Altadena Heritage Chair. He stepped in and stepped up to this position, you know, right around the time of the fire. I think at the end of December he was thinking he would probably do it, and then he took it on, and so we're so grateful for his leadership, and he's been involved in so many places. His house, along with many of ours, was lost, and he's been working really hard to help rebuild Altadena. And so I think it's great that tonight we're having a completely different kind of talk, and he's going to I think I'm just going to bring up Hans, and he's going to start, and we're going to learn about some Altadena bad boys.
Good evening.
Yes.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Well, it is wonderful to be here. I want to first say that the lectures up until this night have been very dignified, very cerebral affairs. This one will not be. So the deal that we're going to make is we're going to have fun. I'm going to try to make this light and amusing. If you're not amused, that's totally fine. Let's get through tonight together. If you see me at Patron over the weekend, in the weeks ahead, you want to throw your chips at me, I'm a grown man. But let's all be friends tonight and have a good time, yeah? All right. I've never used a clicker before, so I'm very excited. So, our first colorful contrarian of Altadena, Angelo Giannone, Lewdness on Lake. So this story actually begins not with Giannone, but with one of the greatest Altadenans of all time, Richard Feynman. So I want to begin by reading to you a passage from Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. There was a period when there were topless restaurants in town. You could go there for lunch or dinner, and the girls would dance without a top, and after a while without anything. One of these places, it turned out, was only 1.5 miles away from my house, so I went there often. I'd sit in one of the booths and work a little physics on the paper placemats with the scalloped edges, and sometimes I'd draw one of the dancing girls or one of the customers just to practice. The owner knew I didn't want to be disturbed, so if a drunk man came over and started to talk to me, right away a waitress would come over and get the guy out of there. If a girl came over, he would do nothing. We had a very good relationship. His name was Giannone. And so sure enough, in 2018, Richard Feynman's papers go to auction at Sotheby's in New York City, and one of the items up for auction is a placemat from Giannone's with Richard Feynman's physics scribblings. Same auction, a sketch by Richard Feynman of a dancer at Giannone's. So where was this place? Well, most of you probably recognize Pinocchio's. It's on Upper Lake in Pasadena, Lower Lake in Altadena. It's right next to a banquet hall called Ellie's. Giannone's was in the space that is now Ellie's. Giannone himself lived at 2929 Maiden Lane, right at the intersection of Maiden and Dolores. So this was his universe. He had his house in Northeast Altadena, and he had his steakhouse at Lake and Rio Grande. But the plot thickens, so I want to read you another passage from Professor Feynman's book. One day there was a police raid on Giannone's, and some of the dancers were arrested. Someone wanted to stop Giannone from putting on topless dancing shows, and Giannone didn't want to stop, so there was a big court case about it. It was in all the local papers. Giannone went around to all the customers and asked them if they would testify in support of him. I think to myself, I'm the only free man in here. I haven't any excuse. I like this place, and I'd like to see it continue. I don't see anything wrong with topless dancing, so I said to Giannone, sure, I'll be glad to testify. In court, the big question was, is topless dancing acceptable to the community? Do the community standards allow it? The lawyer from the defense tried to make me into an expert on community standards. He asked me if I went into other bars. Yeah. And how many times per week would you typically go to Giannoni's? 5, 6 times a week? What sections of the community were represented there? Nearly every section. There were guys from the real estate business, a guy from the city governing board, workmen from the gas station, guys from engineering firms, a professor of physics. I've separately read that Sirhan Sirhan was a regular at Giannoni's, if you can believe that. Professor Feynman's testimony makes it into the newspaper the next day. Bottomless helps Nobel physicist with figures. And they quote his testimony, when my calculations didn't work out, I would watch the girls. But what's fascinating about this story is that Feynman is just a really small piece of it. Giannoni gets convicted in this case. And Feynman takes a back seat to an absolutely insane 4 years of litigation. And so that's what I want to talk about. From about 1969 until 1973, Angelo Giannoni is a full-time litigant in Pasadena. There was 1 week he was arrested 3 times. He was prosecuted for violating the California Penal Code. He was prosecuted for violating Pasadena's own anti-nudity ordinances. The state alcohol licensing board was trying to revoke his liquor license. Pasadena was trying to invoke its red light abatement law to shut his steakhouse down as a nuisance. I have scoured Star News archives and LA Times archives. I have, from about 1969 to 1973, over 110 articles about Angelo Giannoni. Every time he loses, he appeals. And all of this is happening at a time in American life and a time in Pasadena life when the law surrounding all of this stuff is very much up in the air. And so it's a sensitive word, conflagration, but that's what it is. Think of criminal embers, regulatory embers. These things are landing on Angelo Giannoni for 4 years, and he is spending his entire life litigating and defending these cases. One more thing. I cannot find any court records from these cases, so everything that I'm able to reconstruct just comes from newspaper articles. So there's not a single case. I mean, I would love to be able to have a single case and march through it, escort the audience through a single case. Can't really do that. I do want to highlight 2 things about one of the criminal cases that are absolutely mind-boggling. So let's start with this business of Richard Feynman being an expert on community standards. And there's a little bit of legal background here. It's a little wonky, but let's go through it. In the Bay Area, in San Pablo, California, there is a restaurant called The Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is owned and operated by Alberto Giannini. So we've got Angelo Giannoni in Pasadena. We've got Alberto Giannini in San Pablo, California, running The Lighthouse. They're both in trouble for the same thing. Alberto Giannini's case goes to the Supreme Court of California, and he actually gets his conviction reversed. And the Supreme Court holds in Giannini's case that if you're being prosecuted for obscenity or lewd behavior, the community standards cannot come in through the jury. You've got to bring in an expert who presents evidence to the jury of what those community standards are. So the law at the time actually did require that you couldn't just say to the jury, you figure it out. You actually had to bring someone in who's a testifying expert to say, this is what the community believes. And it is true that for the defense in one of Giannoni's cases, that expert was Richard Feynman. So you're probably wondering, well, who was the prosecution's expert in Feynman's case? He was a 66-year-old retired social worker from the Salvation Army. He said that he had spent his entire career shepherding women out of bars. He was asked on, and this is all from the news, it's not from court records. He was asked on cross-examination if he had ever even seen a live nude show. And he said, no, and I never would watch one. And then he said, well, wait, I was in the Royal Navy when I was 12 or 14 years old, and I was in Egypt and the Orient, and I may have seen one there. Those were the two experts in one of Giannoni's trials. I can tell you that as a criminal defense lawyer today, that's nonsense. It would never happen. Never happen. It happened then. I think what we really got were not two experts. We just had one person who liked topless restaurants and another person who didn't. And that's all it was. The second thing about these trials, if you can believe it, is that the judge was actually taking the jury into the steakhouse so that the jurors could watch the dancers perform and then make a judgment about whether what the dancers were doing was in fact lewd or obscene. So on the left-hand side, you can see that headline from the Star News, "Bottom drops for the court." This is a Star News article published in about 1973. It's not Feynman's case, it's another case, but I want to read to you a segment from that article there on the left. Again, this is a newspaper article. Glasses clinked, music blared, red lights shone, hips swayed, and the judge watched. Court convened at 3 p.m. at Giannoni's Steakhouse Monday to hear, or rather see, whether 3 women arrested there while performing bottomless were committing lewd acts. The more than 200 persons in attendance became quiet with anticipation as Angelo Giannoni, owner of the steakhouse, stepped on stage and asked for decorum in the courtroom. Then the first dancer, Brenda Ramona Rolfing, or as she prefers to be called for public exposure, Stormy Sky, mounted the stage and "I'm a Girl Watcher" screamed from speakers throughout the room. After a few initial movements, she looked at the judge, his retinue, and then Giannoni announcing, "I can't dance to that one." Silence prevailed. The Pink Panther then came from the speakers and the dancer came to life. She swayed, she turned, she threw her shoulders back, she kicked, she took off her top. The judge sucked on his pipe and took notes. So what happens to Giannoni after 3 or 4 years of litigating in court full time? He basically loses, and he loses because of 2 Supreme Court decisions that come down late 1972, early 1973. One of those comes from the US Supreme Court, the other comes from the California Supreme Court. The US Supreme Court in California versus LaRue says that the Alcohol Licensing Board can regulate sexual entertainment in an establishment that it is licensing to sell alcohol. The California Supreme Court case, which I can never pronounce the name of, so I won't try, says kind of the same thing. It upholds local ordinances like those in Pasadena that basically prohibit naked people from selling food and drinks. So he loses less so to criminal prosecutions, more so to a regulatory framework that makes it impossible to run these kinds of businesses. The thrust of both of those decisions is still with us today, and the basic idea is that whatever First Amendment interest you might think you have in nude dancing or expressive dancing, that interest is significantly diminished if you're a bar selling alcohol. So it's those regulations that essentially put Giannoni out of business. How does it end for Giannoni himself? It does not end well. In 1974, in the depths of the Star News, there is a notice of a trustee's sale for Giannoni's property on Lake, 1453 North Lake. That's where the steakhouse was. I'm pretty sure he lost the property as a result of that trustee's sale. In 1976, according to the Star News, a massage parlor that suspected of prostitution was shut down by Pasadena authorities. Guess who had an office above the massage parlor elsewhere in Pasadena? Angelo Giannoni. In 1978, this is the one court record I've been able to find, and the reason is it's a felony. Everything we've been talking about, these are all misdemeanors. They get destroyed, they don't get preserved, you just can't find them. It's heartbreaking, that's just how it is. The one court record I could find on Giannoni, in 1978, he is arrested, he gets convicted for possession of phencyclidine, which is basically PCP. I noticed in those court records that he has an address on Foothill Boulevard in Monrovia. So our hero of this story goes from his beautiful house at Maiden Lane and Dolores, a free man, to losing his steakhouse, losing his new dancing business, and he's living in an apartment in Monrovia with a PCP conviction. That's the last I can tell you about Mr. Giannone. But I do want to read to you one more article. This was published in the Star News in 1969, same era when he is a full-time litigant being prosecuted. The headline, "Jury Sees It All, Dancer Grinding Out Bare Facts for Defense." And again, this is a newspaper article. Cheryl demonstrated in court, fully clothed, what she had done. It did not evoke the atmosphere of Giannone's on the night of her arrest. So at the request of her lawyer, the scene was shifted to the steakhouse. Cheryl put on her bra and G-string. The jury, 9 women and 3 men, sat at the bar to watch her dance to the record, Viva Torado. The bodily testimony included a shimmy, a squat, and a downward spiral of the pelvis, while Cheryl's back was erect. So my friends, it's Friday night at Giannone's Steakhouse, and I would like to play for you Viva Torado. Do you know that song? Oh, I did not know that song. Just a 30-second clip. Anyone else know Viva Torado? Oh, really? El Chicano. I knew of neither El Chicano or Viva Torado before putting all this together, so. All right, should I quit while I'm ahead or should we go on? So this one's going to be challenging, but we're going to get through this one together. We're going to talk about Paul Little, and my subtitle is Consider the Pornographer, for reasons that we'll get to. The first thing I want to say is I'm sure half of you are about to ask me, wait, please tell me this is the same Paul Little who has a picnic site in the Arroyo Seco. It's a different Paul Little. I know that's very disappointing. I can't tell you how much I would love it if a famous pornographer was also the namesake of a picnic site in the Arroyo Seco. Maybe I should have just lied and trolled the whole room. What happens here? In May of 2007, the U.S. Department of Justice announces that Paul Little has been indicted in the Middle District of Florida. Where is the Middle District of Florida? That is a federal court in Tampa, Florida. So he's indicted across the country. And when the indictment is announced, the Department of Justice also announces, you can see the underlining there, that it is seeking to forfeit his house at 1333 Pleasant Ridge in Altadena, California. Where is that? Well, it's in the Rubio Highlands. It is east of Lake and it's towering above the Rubio Canyon debris basin. If you're familiar with Rubio Canyon and the Mount Lowe Railway, it is right next to the trailhead that goes out to what was the Rubio Pavilion and the Mount Lowe Incline. One of the things I love about this story is that a pornographer was setting up shop next to one of the engineering marvels of the late 19th century. The contrast there is just amazing to me. That's where the house was. This is not from a Paul Little video, so we can relax about that. This is actually a video I found on YouTube, and it's a real estate listing. The realtor is, I'm pretty sure Paul Little owned the house from about the very, very late 90s to almost 2020. And it went on the market a couple of times, as best I can tell, during the period that he owned it. So this is a video that one of his realtors made of the house, I think sometime around 2006, 2007. I'd like to play a clip of it for you. Eat your heart out, Teresa Fuller. So who was this guy, Paul Little? Paul Little is a gonzo pornographer. Well, what does that mean? Think of Hunter S. Thompson and gonzo journalism. It means that he is part of the story. He's got the camera, he's the producer, he's the director, he's also the star. It's not Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, it's Fear and Loathing in Altadena. Who knows this book by David Foster Wallace, Consider the Lobster?
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. So the most famous essay in that book is called Consider the Lobster. It's one of the essays that David Foster Wallace is most famous for. The first essay in that book is called Big Red Sun, and it is David Foster Wallace reporting from the Adult Video News Awards, which are like the pornography Oscars, in Las Vegas in late 1998, 1999. David Foster Wallace spends a lot of time with Paul Little. And so rather than try to introduce him to you myself, I would rather let one of our greatest writers ever introduce Paul Little to you. So a reading from Big Red Sun from David Foster Wallace's book, Consider the Lobster. Mr. Max Hardcore, aka Max Steiner, aka Paul Steiner, nay Paul Little, is 5'6" and a very fit 135. He is somewhere between 40 and 60 years old and resembles more than anything a mesomorphic and borderline psycho Henry Gibson. I had to look up who Henry Gibson is, an actor.
Laughing.
I love this next sentence. I wish I could write like this. A tremendous loss that we don't have David Foster Wallace. He is wearing a black cowboy hat and what has to be one of the very few long-sleeved Hawaiian shirts in existence anyway. A second reading from Big Red Sun by David Foster Wallace. The issue of who exactly invented gonzo being impossibly vexed and so notwithstanding, it's true that Max Hardcore is famous as a director for several things. 1, being incredibly disciplined about budgets and tactical logistics, right down to forcing his crew and staff to wear identical jumpsuits of scarlet nylon so that they look like a national ski team. 2, not only employing ringers, but actually sometimes being able to talk real live civilian little girls on the beach or in the mall into coming on back to the special Max World RV and having sex on camera. 3, being the first in mainstream, meaning non-fetish, adult video, to perpetrate levels of violation and degradation that would have been unthinkable even a few years ago. That's David Foster Wallace writing about Paul Little. We have to go back several years. Paul Little was indicted in federal court in 2007, and I want to talk more about that case. What's interesting is that in 2001, the LA city attorney filed charges against him. And to make a long story short, Paul Little beat the case. If you're curious after or want to ask a question, we can talk a little bit more about the state case. But the short story is, from about 2001 to 2004, Paul Little won his case in LA before the feds got to him. So then what is this federal case all about? Well, let me explain to you the Paul Little business model. So everything he does happens at 1333 Pleasant Ridge in Altadena. He's making the movies there. He's running the business there. He's shipping DVDs from there to his distributor. He also has a website, maxhardcore.com. On that website are trailers for all of his movies. And the movies at issue in this case are trailers for movies intended for European distribution, including Planet Max 16 European version. Let me pause and ask a question. How many good liberals in this room have a favorable view of European social democracies? The Europeans, be that as it may, allow and consume filthier pornography. One of Paul Little's defenses in this case, in fact, is that these movies that were marked as for European distribution should have never been sent out. In any event, you go to maxhardcore.com. You see a trailer on maxhardcore.com for Planet Max 16 European version. You click on it to buy it. You are routed to Jaded Video in Irvine, California. You buy it from Jaded Video. Jaded Video sends a purchase order to Paul Little on Pleasant Ridge. He mails a DVD from his garage to Jaded Video. Jaded sends it out into the world. So what he gets indicted for is using the US mail and using the internet to distribute obscenity. Natural question is, why the hell are they indicting this guy in Florida? And there are several reasons. The simplest reason is that the president at the time was George W. Bush, and his attorney general was Alberto Gonzales. How many people remember Reagan's attorney general, Edwin Meese? So you might remember the famous Meese report, which was about pornography. These prosecutions were a priority during the Reagan years. They were a priority for Edwin Meese. They were not a priority for George H.W. Bush. They were not a priority for Bill Clinton. But when George W. Bush is in the White House and Alberto Gonzales is his attorney general, they decide to start prosecuting these cases. That's the main reason. It's just a political window that's bad for Max Hardcore. The second reason is that the web hosting company he used, which was called Hostway, was based in Tampa, Florida, and it was about a block and a half from the federal courthouse where he was prosecuted. The third reason, and I still don't have an answer to this myself, because on some level they're at odds with one another. Some commentators have said that Florida is conservative, it would have therefore been easy to get a conviction in Florida. The flip side of that is that Florida consumes a lot of pornography, and the argument there was if they could convict this guy in Florida, it would send a message to the rest of the country that this stuff was not safe anywhere. If you get the conviction in Florida, it sends a message across the US to pornographers in California, everywhere else. Those are the three main reasons it's brought in Florida. So what happens in the case? Well, Paul Little has a lot of defenses. There are a lot of very interesting legal arguments. He said, look, I didn't know my web hosting company was based in Florida. These things were marked for European distribution. My distributor, Jaded, should have never sent them out into the world. He did call some experts to say that this is not sort of out of the mainstream. He called a clinical psychiatrist who had some experience, sexual therapy, things like that. He had a number of interesting defenses. But what all of these obscenity cases come down to, at the end of the day, is the Miller test, which some of you may have heard of. It's a Supreme Court case from 1973. It contains the standard for obscenity. This is still the standard to this day. And the Miller test is a three-part test. Material is obscene if it, 1, appeals predominantly to the prurient interest, 2, depicts or describes sexual conduct in a patently offensive way, and 3, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So 3 is the reason I'm not getting arrested tonight, right? This is an intellectual presentation. I'm summarizing this stuff, talking about it in an educational way. Not going to be arrested. What's misleading about this Miller test, and what I want to convey to the room, is that it's very, very hard to operationalize. This is actually a snippet. I have all of the case pleadings from this case. This is a screen grab of the Miller test from the jury instructions. The full jury instruction that explains the Miller test is 4 pages long. I read it out loud to myself, and it took me between 8.5 to 9 minutes to read it to myself. So it's easy to look at that test and think, okay, that makes sense. But when you're a jury sent back to the jury room with a 4-page jury instruction on a 3-part test that took the judge 9 minutes to read to you, it's really, really hard. And it's probably the main reason that these obscenity prosecutions aren't really brought these days. They're just very hard to prosecute, and they're very much a roll of the dice. There's one other distinction that I want to emphasize. Remember with Giannone in his era, under state law, you had to present external expert evidence of what the community standards were. That is not the rule in federal court. It was not the rule when Paul Little was prosecuted in federal court. So during closing argument, the federal prosecutor says to the jury, the government doesn't need to present expert testimony that something's obscene. Why? Because it's up to you. You watch it, you look at it, you decide. That's the essence of an obscenity case. So put yourselves in the shoes of a juror, essentially being told, I don't know, it's pretty disgusting, don't you guys agree? Let me ask you this, how many people after the Eaton fire feel like they've had really close conversations with neighbors? And keep your hands up if you think that through those conversations you've really gotten to know your neighbors in a deeper way. Everyone, right? How many of those conversations have landed on the aesthetics of Golden Guzzlers 7 by Paul Little? Just one. But the point is, we don't talk about this stuff. It's not the subject of conversation. No one's going to the new Alta Chats chairs at Loma Alta Park and talking about whether or how they consume pornography. It's a completely private exercise. It's part of our private life. And so it's a little bit insane that you'd be called into a jury room to suddenly opine about what the community standards are. How do you know? You don't know. Paul Little gets convicted across the board. He serves 46 months in a federal prison in Texas. He dies of cancer in 2023. I know that what you're really wondering is what happened to the house. Let's talk about it. During closing argument, the federal prosecutor says to the jury, why do we keep coming back to this address during the trial? It's because that's where almost everything takes place in this case. It's where Paul Little lives. It's where he films many of his scenes. It's where he runs his business. You saw countless pictures of the house during the DVDs. You saw that yellow couch over and over and over again. Let's talk about this yellow couch. This is a snip not from a Max Hardcore movie. This is a snip from that same real estate video I showed you in the beginning of the presentation. What is absolutely amazing about that real estate video is that that realtor is walking around the house with his oversized suit, showing everything off. He stands on this patio next to this couch and says, here you are in beautiful Rubio Canyon. Someone comments on the YouTube video, legend. I think they just threw a sheet over the famous yellow couch. So this thing goes to the market for some reason during Paul Little's ownership of it, and they make no effort whatsoever to stage or cover up or mask what the house was really all about. At the top of this slide is a snip from the jury verdict form where they're asked about the house itself. So let's read it together. Do you, the jury, unanimously find that the property identified above, and that's 1333 Pleasant Ridge, was used or intended to be used to commit or to promote the distribution of obscene material as charged in counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the indictment? Jury says no. I don't know how they get there, but maybe they felt sorry for him. It's very possible that they just wanted to convict him of the obscenity, but let him keep his house. That's what they did. Paul Little keeps his house after his federal prosecution. But he says something that I have to say, I think it resonates with all of us in this room. Paul Little says after his conviction, that was what was most important to me, that I got to keep my house. I can replace the domain names, maybe make it maxhardcorexxx.com, but as long as I have my house, I figure I'm ahead of the game. So not only did the jury let Paul Little keep his house, the Eaton fire preserved the Paul Little house. So the image on the left there is from the Eaton fire damage map. You can see that Paul Little's house sustained no damage.
Wow.
this middle video, and this is one thing I've always loved about the house. You can see this house from almost everywhere in Altadena. That video in the middle, I stood at the intersection of Holliston and Atchison in Pasadena and looked straight up the street. There's one house in Altadena you can see from very, very lower Holliston in Pasadena. It's the Paul Little house. So let me see if this video will play.
Yeah, there it is.
So it did this in reverse. That's actually my front yard. When our debris was being cleared, I looked through some area that I previously didn't have a view of and could look right at Paul Little's house. This is the Holliston video. It still stands. I drove by it on my way here tonight just to get a little bit of extra inspiration. That's all on Paul Little. We made it. We made it. And then we're going to let Tim Dundon take us home, because this is someone we can all get behind, and he will leave us all in great spirits. So who was Tim Dundon? This is the character that I would suspect most of you are probably familiar with. Yeah, show of hands, who knows Tim Dundon? AKA Zeke the Sheik, the guru of judo, the good hummus man. And my presentation on Dundon is not super organized, and the reason for that is I just think it wouldn't be in the spirit of him to have a particularly tight presentation. On May, I can't see the date from where I'm standing, but on May 24th or 26th, a member of our Facebook community in Altadena, well, Shanti posted a photo of a compost pile on the golf course with some steam coming out of it, and made a comment about the aroma. There were 26 comments on his Facebook post, and it won't surprise you to hear that about 20 of them were about Zeke the Sheik. So who was he? He was a hippie with a compost pile. Where was it? It was at the intersection of Mountain View and Fair Oaks, right across from the cemetery. So the white structure amidst all the trees was actually Zeke's house. The compost pile was on an adjacent lot that he did not own. Mountain View Cemetery owned it.
Oh, wow.
But he had his compost pile there, 40 feet high, about 200 feet long. So what can we say about Zeke the Sheik? Let's just run through some factoids about this man. He had a pet yam. He called his compost Kryptonite. He heard the Beatles cover of Act Naturally in 1973 and had a vision, and that's where all of this started. He spoke in rhyme. He was known to constantly speak in rhyme. He said, "This is the tower of power that makes people behind Katie Couric and Matt Lauer quiver and cower, because it generates the power that makes a flower." He said, "I'm like Paul Revere crossed with Shakespeare, and the question is, debris or not debris?" He incorporated his lot as the promised land. He once appeared in civil court, not criminal court. He once appeared in civil court holding a 3-foot green onion. And then now we're getting to it. He's arrested in November of 1983 with 7 pounds of marijuana. My own digging through the LA County archives, he actually has a number of criminal cases. The marijuana case is the one that got the most attention. There were cocaine cases, there were mushrooms cases. I think that they were consolidated. It's really, really tough to work through court records from the early 70s. They're all handwritten, they're not that legible. It's tough to piece together case numbers and things. I think Zeke had more than one case. Nonetheless, the one that got the most attention, marijuana in 1983. And so the man goes to trial. I think Zeke's trial lasted about 1 day. He had no defense whatsoever, other than Genesis chapter 1, verse 29. God gave man dominion over all plants. That's all he had. He had no legal defense whatsoever. He did show up with about 15 poems that somehow the judge let him read from the stand that had nothing to do whatsoever with his criminal case. So let's read one together. He's saying this in court. I'm the politician for which you've all been wishing, ever since I had the vision that my mission was to end the great second prohibition and to form the coalition for the abolition of nuclear fission, and in addition, to wipe out malnutrition. Because this all put me under a great deal of suspicion, I made the decision to make the transition to become a politician. That is Zeke in court. He also wore that outfit to his trial. Zeke got convicted, unsurprising. One of the great things, great things about Zeke's case is that the press had fun with it too, and they chimed in. So this is an LA Times article describing Zeke's conviction. Zeke's week was bleak, alter ego up the creek. And after he was convicted, Zeke said, I'm the stout devout who was hereabout, but they wouldn't let me go my route, so I just had to hang out and more or less pout. But now I'm going to go out and show them how to knock out the drought. That's a way to take a conviction. Then he gets sentenced. He gets 60 days. These are felonies. I mean, we can laugh about drug possession cases. The only reason we have Zeke's records is because he got convicted of felonies and not misdemeanors. 60 days in jail, $1,000 fine, 160 hours of community service. He showed up to his sentencing wearing that caftan and headpiece that you see in that photo. The court and the prosecutors in this case made statements to the press that this was one of the most interesting criminal trials they had ever seen. It's amusing. I love that we can tell these stories, but again, these are like Giannoni's trials. This stuff would never go on, and it's candidly surprising that judges would let it go on, but these were better days, I guess. Zeke also appeals, and I'm glad that I found his appellate brief. It's one of the weakest appellate briefs I've ever read. Zeke has two arguments. His first argument is that he had a good faith religious belief, good faith sort of conscientious objector reason for wanting to have and smoke marijuana. His second argument was that imposing as a term of probation that he drug test violated his freedom of religion. This photo has nothing to do with his appeal, but I love this photo because he has these very hopeful eyes, and it's almost like he's trying to give himself a chance with that thumb that's sort of not quite up, but sort of sideways. And in any event, the appeal is a total loser. These arguments go nowhere, and Zeke's conviction stands. I did find, and I love this, I found a document in one of his court files that was his form for completion of community service. And I can tell you, I've been practicing criminal defense in LA for a lot of years. I probably submitted hundreds of these to the court. I've read hundreds of them. They're never very interesting documents. But whoever supervised Zeke when he was doing his community service had something really sweet to say about him. Agency stated that client has done an outstanding job and they appreciate his presence there. I find that very sweet. I have to say, it's endearing, and I think that it probably is consistent with how Altadenians felt about having Zeke as a member of their community. They appreciated his presence. Nothing is ever uncontroversial in Altadena. So after Zeke is convicted and this trial has been in the news, there's always someone who's not amused. A woman writes to the Star News on June 26, 1985 and says, Zeke's not funny. Regarding the recent article Zeke the Sheik, who kept the court officials in stitches during his trial, that made me sick. I'm sure if any of those court officials had children on drugs or had anyone of their family die from a drug incident, as my 23-year-old nephew died from being thrown off a bridge and left to drown on Christmas 1984 because of people who were on drugs, they wouldn't have found Mr. Dundon so funny. So again, there's nothing that's ever universally uncontroversial in Altadena. I have one more thing. I found this today, if you can believe it. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the LA archives for some of Zeke's files, and the quality was so poor. But one of the clerks in archives, very, very sweet, offered to try to make me better, more legible copies of things. And I got a call yesterday, and they said, we have some additional files on Zeke for you. I haven't gone through them all, but I saw something that I think is pretty amazing, just flipping through them in the garage downtown today. There are some court minutes here, and if you're curious, come see me after, I'll show them to you. Dated February 8th, 1990. The court is informed telephonically that defendant is deceased. There's a note on the next page. The defendant's attorney represents to the court that the defendant is deceased. This is 1990. Zeke died in 2019. I think there's a possibility that he tried to fake his own death to somehow get off of probation and just move on with his life so that these cases weren't hanging over his head. I don't know how it would ever end up in a court file that the court was notified that someone was deceased unless there was some chicanery surrounding that. It's an interesting question for some additional research. I do have one beef with Zeke, and I'm very, very religious about this, so you're going to have to bear with me. I hate the Beatles. I really don't like the Beatles. And those of you who know me know I'm a country music fanatic. Act Naturally is a Johnny Russell song that he wrote for Buck Owens. Nobody should be singing Act Naturally other than Buck Owens. So, if we can all rise, let's send Zeke the Sheik out together to Act Naturally.
The biggest fool ever hit the big time, and all I gotta do is act naturally. All I gotta do is act naturally.
So I've got about 5 more minutes. Timing has gone perfectly. Thank you so much. I have 2 closing slides. I do have some bonus slides depending on how timing went, but I think we're good. I think we'll do 2 more slides and then we can have a conversation and get to know one another. And whoever said boo when I criticized the Beatles, we can talk as well. So let's get serious for a moment, and I hope I don't get too emotional talking about this. But think about how these outlaws connect to one another and how they connect to us. And there are common threads through these folks and through everyone in this room. The first thing about them is that they built worlds that let them be entirely themselves. Giannone, Paul Little on Pleasant Ridge, Zeke the Sheik, they inhabited a universe that was 100% who they were as people. And I think a lot of Altadenans live that way. 2, they were resilient motherfuckers. They were resilient people. After Paul Little was convicted, he said, I know what my job was. I know where I worked. I knew it was legally dangerous. In the same way, I think a lot of Altadenans have said, we live in a perilous place. Climate change is real. We live at a wildland-urban interface. Things can happen when you live in those places. It's the exact same mentality Paul Little had in acknowledging that he's working in a legal gray area that can cause problems for him. Altadena said, we're going to build back smarter and more sensibly. Paul Little said, I'm taking my servers out to Europe. I'm not putting them in the US. It's the exact same mentality. When you believe in something so much, like Altadenans do, you will take risks for it. They took risks for what they believed in. Number 3, they catalyzed public debate. Very important. Each of these 3 people started conversations in the community, and those conversations forced the community to consider who they were and what they stood for. You might not like these three people, you might be on the other side of them, but they were catalytic in their role in the community in getting us to look inward, think about who we are, think about what we stand for. That is a gift. They weren't for everyone, but they didn't hurt anyone. And I know that might be controversial, but as a lawyer, these are victimless crimes, right? No one's coming to court to testify against Zeke or Paul Little saying that person hurt me. You might not like what they did. There's certainly an argument for Paul Little that this stuff has negative social consequences. I don't really think they hurt anyone. They may have not been for you, but they were for themselves and people who love them. 5, they were diverse. I got to put my politics on the table here. I don't like the way we talk about diversity. I think it has become a virtue signal. I think that we strip it of content, given how often we use it and the way in which we use it. Let's celebrate all kinds of diversity. Most importantly, let's get beyond categories, get to know people, and celebrate people who enrich our lives, whoever they are. These were very diverse people. And so the question, this always comes up. I think about Michelle's lecture on Papineau, right? First name. Paul Papineau. Someone asked at the end of Michelle's lecture a long time ago about Paul Papineau, who was this guy? Was he a knucklehead? Was he a snake oil salesman? Or was he kind of a freedom fighter and a serious guy who really, really tried to do good? What's my view of these three people? I've spent a lot of time with them. They're exhausting people, but I've gotten to know them pretty well. And I'll tell you this, I am not that keen on watching Paul Little's pornography. No interest. I'm not that keen on living next to a huge pile of shit. I might be keen on a steakhouse that has topless servers when Bernie opens up once again. We'll see. But I think about the opening line to Leonard Cohen's, where he says, like a bird on a wire, like a drunk in a midnight choir, I've tried in my way to be free. These folks tried to be free. They really did. And at the end of the day, I think that freedom is the singular virtue of Altadena more than anything else. It is the place where I've lived in my life, where I feel the most free. You all have given me a lot of your free time tonight. Thank you so much. I'll stop there. Let's get to know one another and take some questions. Michelle.
I want to know why judges don't today conduct court in a place like a topless bar. It just doesn't happen.
So here's the problem with doing that. I'll repeat the question. Why don't judges today take juries out to the scenes of crimes? Why not take them into a topless bar? The main reason is that you can't control the testimony. The question when he's being tried for lewd and obscene behavior is the behavior that night. What was the actual behavior that night that he was arrested? It's irrelevant what a dancer says she's doing a month later when she's in court. There's no reliability that the dance she's giving to the jury is the exact same dance that was happening when the arrest took place. That's the main reason. Some of you might remember that Lance Ito took some of the O.J. Simpson jurors to O.J. Simpson's house. I have heard stories that there was a young lawyer on that team, defense team, whose job it was to decorate that house with African artifacts so that it would appear to the jury that he had a greater connection than he actually did to the black community. It's just unreliable. I have a story though. I spend a lot of time in southern Arizona, little town called Patagonia. It's the only place I might like more than Altadena. I have a friend down there who's the presiding county judge, and he recently presided over a case that made national news where a rancher shot a migrant. He took the jury out to this rancher's ranch. That, I think, is defensible, because all you want to do is give that jury a sense of what that landscape is like, how remote that place is, what kind of setting that rancher is in vis-a-vis the broader spatial dynamics. That's very reliable. But sending a jury into a steakhouse so that someone can dance and say, oh, this is the same dance I did a month ago, it's not reliable at all. I love that it happened, don't get me wrong, we wouldn't be here otherwise. But it's just lousy judging in my view. Please.
Did Zeke ever have a family or get married, and what happened to the compost pile?
So that's a good question too. My understanding is Zeke was married, had kids, he was divorced. I was most interested and still am in criminal prosecutions. As many of you know, there's a whole other saga with Zeke where he was cited by county authorities over the compost pile. These weren't criminal prosecutions, but there's a whole other universe to Zeke where he was actually being cited by the county, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, at one point, the compost pile was threatened to be removed, and our very own Catherine Barger, when she was working for Antonovich, said, everyone in the community loves this place, and we're hoping we can find a way to keep it. Watts has Watts Towers, Altadena has the pile to treat the animal. So he did have a family, and I think what ended up happening is that all of these citations and things eventually caught up with him, and it was bulldozed at some point. It was also, how many people have watched The Mortician?
Yeah.
So recall that the crematorium was owned by and on the property of Mountain View Cemetery, similar to Zeke's compost pile. So I think at some point too, and I haven't dug into this piece of it as much, but I think that Mountain View may have had some role, I don't know for sure, but in saying, look, you know, we've been letting you do this, but decades of citations from the county.
That was catching on fire.
Indeed it was, and after it caught on fire, Zeke said it was like hell on earth. It was like Puff the Magic Dragon and Dante's Inferno right in the backyard. What's interesting about that is that in, I want to say, I don't know, sometime around 2000, he was in trouble again. The authorities were saying, look, this thing can catch fire. It obviously had 2 times in 1990. And he said, no, it's not flammable. And according to the Star News, he offered to use a propane torch to demonstrate to the authorities that it wouldn't catch on fire. And they said, no thanks, we're good, don't worry about it. So yes, there is a whole other saga with Zeke and the county and permitting and all of that with the compost pile. I just focus more on the criminal prosecution.
Have you found other casts of characters?
Yeah, there's, how many people know the Valentine Cottage in Wildwood Park at the end of Palm? How many people know the Valentine House at 2800 Holliston? It's the same Walter Valentine. This is a crazy story. I learned of it from an Instagram content creator, but the short story, I'm going to butcher it, so I don't want to say more than I should. Walter Valentine met a woman in Montana, had an affair with her. He somehow convinced her that he had died, and he moved to that house on 2800 Holliston. She found out while in Montana that he was not dead, and she tracked him down to Holliston. And she moved into a house neighboring 2800 Holliston. And there was some big legal saga that followed where she sued him, he sued her. It's a really, really great story. But I haven't gotten to the bottom of it. The 3 folks that have interested me the most over time have been Giannone, Paul Little, and Zeke. And I'll say, of the 3 of those, the Paul Little story, it's all out there. I mean, this is a federal court case in 2008. You can go on Pacer, you can see the entire case docket. There's also a ton of stuff on Zeke, just newspaper commentary, things like that. The story that interests me the most in terms of doing something with it, I don't know what that would be, is the Giannone story, because it's never really been told, it's never been put together, and it really is a fascinating legal history. You've got all these judges taking the juries to the steakhouse, you've got Richard Feynman showing up. It's happening again at a time in American life when, you know, the relationship between nudity and the First Amendment is very much being tested. I think for me, I mean, by all means, pick the one you like the most, but I think Giannone is the richest of these stories. Please.
Yeah, I have a small Zeke story.
Please.
In the 80s, I was putting in some planting at my house and I wanted some compost. So I went to and knocked on his door and I said, I'd like to buy some. I have a pickup truck, I'll take some. He said, I can't sell it because if I do, I'll be in trouble with the authorities and I can't let you have too much. But if you bring a 5-gallon bucket over here, you can fill it. So that's what I did.
And I've also heard he would give it away, but then he would pay to deliver it, and that was a way that he would circumvent the rules about selling it.
Well, he didn't say anything like that to me, but my question is, do you see or have you found any relationship between the Giannone trials and the Lenny Bruce trials in San Francisco somewhat earlier?
I haven't. It's super fascinating. Again, Giannone is the one that's the most interesting to me. And I'm sorry, one follow-up to that though. Giannone was not the only guy whose ass was on fire. Anyone remember the High Dive Bar or High Life Bar in Pasadena? Leo Barbaric? He was doing the same thing Giannone was. So Giannone was probably the most prolific, but there were some other establishments in Pasadena. In fact, it's hard to see, but this was a report from the city of Pasadena in 1971. And it was a report on a bunch of establishments, including Giannone's, how many reported crimes and how many arrests. And this was sort of a Pasadena report that was the basis for seeking some of these ordinances that prohibited nudity. And one of the other bars identified on this report was the High Dive, which was Leo Barbaric's place on Colorado in Pasadena. Please.
Are there any current outlaws or controversial figures that remind you of any of them?
No, there aren't. It's, I hope that when we reconstitute ourselves, we will have open arms for anyone and everyone. For me, the place that comes the closest is the Zorthian Ranch. You still get that spirit there a little bit. I would ride my bike there to take yoga. It's the only place I would take yoga. I don't want to go to a yoga studio, but I will go to the barn at the Zorthian Ranch just because you do suck in that spirit a little bit of these outlaws. And if you get to know Alan, and look, I consider Alan a friend. I think he's a great guy. I know he's not for everyone, but he, he's living his own life up there too. And I think when I think about what that ranch is and what it means to the community, I do think it's one of the last bastions of these kinds of characters. Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is no. I haven't seen anything in court records that speak to, especially Zeke, being forced to submit to or undergo mental health testing. I will say, I found something online. It's really sweet. It might make me get emotional again. It was some kind of message board. It was in like 2000 or something. And the person posting, I don't know what website it was worse than Reddit. It was just a lame message board. Anyway, someone commented about their friend Tim Dundon in Altadena, and the gist of it was, has anyone heard from him? Does anyone know if he's okay? And then they had some line that was to the effect of, he just wants to know that people in this world care about him. And this was a friend speaking about Zeke looking for help online. So it's very possible, we laugh about these folks and smile about them, and we think that they're larger than life. I don't think Paul Little had any shortage of friends and people in his world. And I'm sure Giannone didn't either, but it's a great question with respect to Zeke. And Mark in the back.
Yeah. I just want to say about 10 years ago, I think Michelle and I went to Zeke had quite a following, quite a lot of friends. And we went to a party over in, I think it was Lincoln, it's called Lincoln Heights, near downtown. A wonderful kind of communal house. And there was a band and a big birthday party for him, in which he danced. He was all bent over, but he was having a great time. So he had a fan base, really.
Yeah. Michelle.
I just wonder, we didn't get any sense of Giannone, his personality or what drove him to keep fighting these legal fights that he kept losing. I mean, is there any record on his personality? Did Feynman write about him as as a friend or?
Not much. I'm super curious. It doesn't come out in many of the Star News articles. You don't get a lot of interviews with him. There's a lot of reporting about, and a lot of the reporting is redundant, and a lot of it's brief, you know, Giannone convicted. Contrast Paul Little, contrast Zeke. The records of those folks are really, really robust in terms of giving you a rich sense of who they were. It's a great question. I'd like to know more about Giannone, especially 4 years. I mean, Paul Little beat one case, kept working, took an L, and was back at it. With Giannone, it's a great question. But unfortunately, I just don't know a lot. Yes, please.
Are these three buried at Mountain View?
I don't know where they're buried. I'm sorry, say?
Feynman is.
Well, Feynman is sure, but I don't know where the three of these people are buried. Paul Little did leave Altadena, I think, in 2020. Like I said, Giannone, the last I learned of him was this conviction for PCP in 1978. I just don't know what really became of them. Paul Little spent a lot of time, I think somewhere farther east in this area. He also liked Long Beach a lot, but I don't know where he's buried.
What about Zeke?
I don't know. It's a great question.
Yes.
Yeah, I just don't know. It's a great question. Something to look into. Courtney asked why I had this backup slide, LA against the mountains. So let me read to you the passage that I was thinking of incorporating into this and didn't get to. Does everyone know this essay? This is a famous John McPhee essay. It's really about debris flows coming off of the San Gabriel Mountains, but I want to read you a passage from McPhee's essay. This is what he says. Los Angeles is overmatched on one side by the Pacific Ocean and on the other by very high mountains. With respect to these principal boundaries, Los Angeles is done sprawling. The San Gabriels, in their state of tectonic youth, are rising as rapidly as any range on Earth. Their loose inimical slopes flout the tolerance of the angle of repose. Rising straight up out of the megalopolis, they stand 10,000 feet above the nearby sea, and they are not kidding with this city. Shedding, spalling, self-destructing, they are disintegrating at a rate that is also among the fastest in the world. The phalanx communities of Los Angeles have pushed themselves hard against these mountains, an aggression that requires a deep defense budget to contend with the results. So there were two lines in there that really resonate with me. The first was, they are not kidding with this city. And then the second was, an aggression that requires a deep defense budget to contend with the results. And I think the connection I was thinking of working through this is that the law was not kidding with any of these three people either. And they also had to dig deep into a defense budget to fight their fights. And so in the same way that our posture, Altadenans in this room, has to contend with the mountains as this entity that's not kidding with us, requires a deep defense budget, it's useful to think of these three people as also fighting something, the law, that's really not kidding with them. And they also had to have deep defense budgets to wage that battle. Does that make sense? That's one more, and then we'll, yeah.
The defense lawyers for Giannone and Paul Little, I don't know about Zeke the Sheik. Were they pro bono? Did they take on the case and
these people, well, I think it's an interesting question. These people had resources. I mean, we can laugh about Paul Little and say he's a sleazy pornographer. He was a big deal. You know, he made a lot of money doing this. He bought a beautiful house in Altadena. He could afford the lawyers he paid for. He was represented by Jeffrey Douglas, who's a very, very well-known First Amendment lawyer. Very, very well established. So Paul Little did not need any sort of help with his legal fees. Zeke did at one point. I did see, in digging deep on Giannone, I think he ran out of money, because you'll remember that 1974 notice of trustees sale against the steakhouse. Well, I saw something else, again, hard to make out, 1975, 1976. Jeffrey Diamond also took out a lien or somehow sued Giannone over that house. So I think he maybe didn't pay his bills, and then his lawyer came after him. So they probably, all of these folks started with resources. I think Zeke ran out. I think Angelo Giannone ran out. I don't think Paul Little ever ran out. He had great lawyers to the very end. You have been an amazing group. Thank you so much for joining me.